Begin. All right, my friends. Today we are going to finish the first lecture. Do note that we have a few additional lectures posted on Moodle. Also, these additional definitions of modernism will help you out quite a bit when it comes to writing your prelude paper, which is due near the end of the month. We'll go over these a little bit today. I haven't decided whether I want to do that immediately, which I often just jump into things regardless of how I schedule them. But I think I'm actually going to get into that at the end of today. Remember also that I did say to you that I would talk to you a little bit, really it's going to be a little bit, about the prelude paper today. And I will read through the rubrics, say a couple things about them, mention the common errors. Consider this an ongoing dialogue. I want you to revisit this document. There's a lot of information on there, and so I don't expect that you're going to retain it all at once. Something you might do just to test yourself and to see how much you do retain is, you know that I record these lectures. You ought to listen to one of them at some point. Listen to it at 2 times speed because you've heard it before and you want to get through it while you're on a walk or something. You know, do it, or when you're doing laundry. Do it between things. If you're listening to things, you can really double your productivity in a time by doing some mundane thing while also learning. In any case, you should listen just to see how many things that you did not hear that I said. Because probably you think, you basically hear everything. But I can tell you, as somebody who has sat through probably 10 times as many lectures as you have at this point in my life, and by the end of it, probably 100 times, unless you're also an academic, is that I almost never hear nearly as much as I think I do. And when I revisit lectures, and I've listened to some lectures on Don Quixote, on Dante 10, 15 times in my life, I still learn new things. This isn't even from a great book. This is from a single lecture that I just listened to. And so you should really start to think about how little it is that you see and how important it is to revise what you think you see because of that. Even if you are the most perspicacious person in the world, you are Sherlock Holmes in terms of observation, there will be things that you miss. So this is a good reason not only to revisit that which you read, but also to revisit that which you write, because you will certainly make mistakes when you write as well. You mathematicians know this as well. Need to check your work. Need to check your work, because when you focus on one thing, you don't focus on something else, you miss things. I think I brought up the invisible gorilla experiment once here. Do any of you know about that? I could show it to you at some point. Well, basically, it's a psychological experiment where there are 3 people dribbling balls, or sorry, they have balls, and they're going to pass them to each other. And the psychologist says to the individuals, count how many passes happen between these people. And, you know, people are competitive. So they're like, okay. And while they're doing that, a guy in a gorilla suit walks, stands in the middle of the room, and keeps walking. And so the video ends, psychology professor says, how many of you saw the gorilla in the video? And like half the people are like, oh, I've seen it. And then half the people are like, what? And you have to show the gorilla. Even the people that saw the gorilla, though, they often have seen such a video before. And so there are new versions of it where, say, the background changes colors and one of the people passing leaves and another comes. And so you ask, oh, well, did you notice these 2 or 3 details as well? And the people obviously say no. And what this is supposed to show you is that you see what you focus on. You don't see most other things. And so when I say things like, you'll see it when you believe it, rather than you'll believe it when you see it, I think that's far more accurate. You see what you already believe in. You don't see what you don't. Or it can be, let's say that's more of a shocking experience. All right, we're going to talk about these prompts just a little bit. At the end, I'm going to try and reserve, it's hard to say how much time I should reserve, but something like 10 minutes. So we'll have Corey start and tell us a little bit about modernism and the prologue to this work. I'll go very quickly through the first few chapters, then pretty quickly through the next few chapters, 9 to 14, which are the second part of part 1. Remember that part 1 is itself split into 4 parts, but that part 1 was supposed to be a standalone novel, which was then, there was then a second part of the novel written 10 years later in response to a spurious writing about Don Quixote by pseudonymous Avellaneda. And so this first part of the novel was meant to be the entirety of the novel. And I think you will have already noticed in this second part that what I promised in the true second part was already starting to happen, which is that which you thought you were seeing in person, you're actually seeing through something like a camera, and really you're seeing it through two cameras, because you have not only a narrator, but you also have a historian, Cide Hamete Benengeli, as well. So you are 2 times removed from the narrative, as it were. Perhaps let me just ask you a question. Does it ever annoy you when you watch an episode of a show that you like and the individuals are stuck in a single location the entire episode? Do you know what those sorts of episodes have? There's a term for that. Do you know what it's called? Yes? Filler. Filler, you might describe it like that, but it has a term that defines it. It's called bottlenecks. The idea is to shake up a bottle, what builds? Pressure and stress. These are stressful episodes. Imagine an entire episode of, say, your favorite show set in an elevator that was stopped between the 3rd and the 4th floors. Yeah, right. Kind of stresses you out even thinking about it, right? Well, something you may notice in a story like this is that it's made of many stories. It is what is called episodic. And this makes it hard to really know what the narrative of Don Quixote is, because this happens, this happens, this happens. All these sort of discontinuous things happen, very much like what would later be a situational comedy, a sitcom, where if you think about the first seasons of South Park or The Simpsons, there's an episode, standalone episode, standalone episode, standalone episode. Very rarely do they have narratives that go through multiple episodes. This is actually a very interesting innovation, say like Netflix, where you have entire seasons that take a narrative. It's in some ways a new form of media. But one thing I think you're going to have to get past in order to enjoy this novel is waiting for them to get back to the journey. The journey, this is a very sort of American Buddhist thing to say, the journey is the novel here. No matter whether Don Quixote is himself involved in the fighting, as he is with the Basque, to whom he loses his ear, becomes disfigured, but he will become even further disfigured, by the way, being now a disfigured, old, insane protagonist. For those of you who are very interested in having the most diverse and interesting characters in your lives. But he will, losing my train, I lose all the time, by the way. But there's so much interesting to think about, then what's the matter? Don Quixote, the Basque. It doesn't matter whether he is himself doing the action of the narrative or witnessing the action. Something we will see ourselves more and more is that he is present when something interesting happens. He gets to witness it. We get to witness through his perspective, and often Sancho's perspective too. Something you will have noticed is that they're very different perspectives, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. Okay, Corey, I have given us our prelude for today, but you came up to me a couple days ago and you said, Pastor Schmidt, I think I see some modernism in this text immediately, and you, I think, identified it in the prologue. Do you know what page it was, in case we want to follow along?
Yeah, it was well, I don't have the specific page number, but I know it was the 2nd paragraph of the Arthur Preface.
Okay, 2nd paragraph of the author's preface. I'll see if I can, yeah, well, it's just how I say it.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find it. If I can't, I don't mind. Just please share.
Yeah, so last week, the thing that I came to you about is it was like during the time that I believe it was written, religion was like a big thing then.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that.
A lot of people integrated religion into the books they wrote. And Don, I keep forgetting the guy who wrote it. Cervantes.
Miguel de Cervantes.
When he wrote it, he said in the preface, my wish would be simply to present it to the plain and unadorned, without any embellishment of preface or unaccountable muster of customary sonnets, epigrams, and eulogies, such as are commonly put at the beginning of books. And being a modernist at the time, he went against the traditional way of writing the books that they did.
So he criticizes this formalism, this structure that books of his time take, and then he himself does what he claims that he will not do. You will see him contradict himself over and over again in this text, and this itself is an aspect of modernism, an author that that one cannot necessarily take at face value, which perhaps will teach you a lot about human nature, to perhaps not take people at their word, but to see them for their actions. And which, well, perhaps that is a profound thing that Don Quixote can tell you. And so Cervantes contradicts himself. And so a question you may wish to ask yourself and to write about, and is Cervantes consciously contradicting himself in order to add to the art? Or is he sort of a foolish author? Is he the sort of author that does not even revise his work, that makes claims and then fails to realize them? And is this what modernism is? And I really want you to think about that question. Okay, very good. Thank you for it. And if any of you else have questions about anything in the course or find something very interesting, again, come talk to me after the class, email me. I'll try and integrate your questions in because the books we're reading are complicated. The ideas we're dealing with are complicated. And it just takes time to parse it all out. This was my attempt at undoing a yo-yo knot. Any of you yo-yoers? And the worst thing about yo-yoing is that when you're trying to do something like cat's cradle, and I was a yo-yoer back in the day, and then you get a knot, one of these Gordian knots that are impossible to untangle. There we are. Just for your edification of the day, have any of you ever heard of a Gordian knot? I don't think this is going to work on the board. Gordian knot is a mythological knot that's impossible to untangle, that supposedly Alexander the Great saw and then cut with a sword. So sometimes being a pragmatic or practical individual gets you past being overly severe. All right.
Did he write that?
I'm sorry, did who write what? I already
Said,
changed.
Alexander, did he?
No, Alexander, supposedly it was written by Indian commentators, but I heard it third hand. But that story is about in the ether, as it were. Okay, I've said a lot of these things. I think that's good. Let's remember a couple things about this text. We're not sure what's real. We're not sure what's true. We have a protagonist who is himself defined as insane. The narrator is also a little unreliable. The narrator does not tell us where the action of the narrative takes place. Somewhere that he does not care to remember, that is something that is near Toboso, which is an area in Spain. But then we also hear from the narrator that he doesn't necessarily know what Don Quixote's name was before he named himself, gave himself the appellation Don Quixote. But it was something like Alonso Quijada, Quijana. Later, we'll hear Alonso Quijano the Good. And so for a text that seems to be so sensitive to identity, and we'll get into that today, especially with Marcela and Grysostomo, this text seems to be a little bit cavalier with how it gives names to characters. There seems to be a problem, or rather, it is problematizing what is in a name. Who is allowed to give one a name? How does one act based on having a name? Can one just take on a new name? I think to some extent in our culture, in 21st century America, we understand this a little bit because we have the notion of sort of being a young person and then taking on your career. And in fact, in my career, you take on a title, right? You become professor, and then you are different. You in fact have to take qualifying exams, write a dissertation for it, and then be hired on and get tenure eventually. And so you have to earn it, but there is a transformation. What instigates such transformations? Do you decide yourself and tell others that you have transformed, or must you yourself do something in order to be perceived as having been transformed? Do you give yourself your name, or does one another give you a name? And we know that the so-called Christian name, the first name, is also called your given name, your surname. Then you also have your family name. This is a very old convention. Depending on where you come from, family names can be a little bit different. Spanish tradition, you include mother's lineage as well as father's. Arabic tradition, you include even children. Abu, for example. Same with the Jewish tradition with bin. That indicates your son. So like Judah bin Ezra, for example. Judah, son of Ezra. And so names. Names are very important in this text, but we don't yet have a beat on what the meaning of it is in the text, nor do we understand exactly the author's perspective on identity. Is he making fun of our conventions? Is he trying to shine some light on some idiosyncrasy of naming conventions? Keep that in mind, because there is going to be a disparity over and over and over again between what Don Quixote sees and therefore how he acts in situations from how everybody else around him, particularly Sancho, acts. We'll see that today when I briefly talk about the episode of the Windows. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to a couple of things. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the characters here, just because I think this will help to frame the narrative a little bit. Dulcinea. We will soon learn that the lady love of our chivalric knight Don Quixote, Dulcinea, her name is not actually Dulcinea. She has herself been named in an act of sort of, you might say, masculine projection. Dulcinea, the apple of the eye of this Don Quixote, though apple's not quite right, not a child, but the jewel of his eye. And Dulcinea itself is a name that comes from dulce, dulcet in our own language, sweet. She is the sweet. She is herself based on notions from or characters from other chivalric romances that are pretty famous. In particular, Orlando Furioso. Orlando is also called Roland in the French tradition, Orlando in the Italian tradition, which is sort of funny that we have in Orlando, Florida, which is very much a Spanish-speaking place, now than an Italian-speaking place. But Orlando Furioso, he goes crazy, loses wits, has to go to the moon, where there's a limbo of insanity or witlessness in order to regain his mind after the woman that he loves, Angelica, chooses a Moor instead of him. Little context. Chivalric romances are written during the times of the Crusades and just after. One of the major themes that comes from these, like Pétion de Troyes, von Eschenbach from the German tradition, Troyes from the French tradition, is the fight for the Holy Land between Christians and Muslims. Muslims are often called Moors or Moriscos in this literature. A Morisco is a little bit different from a Moor in that is a Muslim who was forced to convert in Spain at the beginning of the 16th century or the end of the 15th century in order to stay in Spain. Something about Spain, the cosmopolitan place, and we run into these notions today when we talk about the Basque, is that a lot of people think of Spain in America and they think of Spanish. Spain, historically, and this is even coming through in its sort of educational movements in history right now, has many different linguistic groups as well as religious groups as well as ethnic groups. And in particular, in the 1490s and early 1500s, there was, and this is when Columbus sailed the ocean blue under the so-called Spanish kings, Ferdinand and Isabella, there was an attempt to unify the nation under a single religion. And what this involved was expelling Jews who would not convert. Those who did were called the conversos, and expelling Muslims who would not convert, and those who stayed were called the Moriscos. And so something else we'll run into today is the Basque. You may have noticed in translation that the Basque is shown as having poor English. The idea is that the Basque doesn't speak very good Spanish, because Basque is itself a language from a region of Spain that is etymologically, so I've been told, unrelated to any other language in the world. It's one of those strange endogenous languages. So Spain is a much more diverse and interesting and conflict-ridden place than one might at first imagine, just hearing a little bit about Columbus and the Spanish kings from one's high school education. Some more important lady loves of chivalric knights. Amadis de Gauls was named Oriana, beautiful name, daughter of Lisuarte, king of England. And then, though this is not a chivalric romance, Dante in his Commedia, the Divine Comedy, we often translate it as, has a lady love that he follows through heaven named Beatrice. Beatrice is how we say it. Beatus, happy or blessed. If you read the Jerome, Vulgate, Latin, New Testament, Beatus is the word for blessed. And so trice, thrice, so thrice blessed. And so there's a little bit of Cristal in her name, though an inversion of gender. And we'll get into that today too. We'll talk a little bit about religion and inversion of gender. Start to see what this Don Quixote or this Cervantes cat's got up his sleeve. Something interesting about this representation. You will soon learn that Dulcinea is an image projected on a common peasant woman from Toboso by Don Quixote. So when you see this image represented of Dulcinea, is this of Dulcinea as she was or Dulcinea as she was imagined? That's very good. It's very good. And there are things that you can tell here. One thing that I will say that makes this clearly an imagination is she's a peasant woman who works outside. What can you say is it clearly wrong about this representation if we were attempting to represent her as she actually is described non-ideally in the text? She's too pale. Exactly. You can tell that this is an idea of attractiveness, of nobility at this time. In the same way that sometimes people are skinny, sometimes people are larger, showing that they're so wealthy that they can eat a lot, or they're so wealthy they can afford a nice gym. These standards change. But yes, obviously here, these are nice clothes. They're not dirty. Her forearms are not huge. That's the only thing you've really actually heard about her so far, that she can grind pork really well. That suggests that she's that she's got really big masculine forearms, that she is herself very different from how she is perceived by Don Quixote, which further makes us question this, the sanity of this insane knight. What is it that he sees, that he overlays this ideal onto? And can we see through his insane ideal to what actually is? And I'll add a third question. This is all in literature, right? What does it mean for a character in the literature to misperceive another character in the literature whom we only have an idea of from the literature, right? Dulcinea doesn't exist in reality. There's no actual lady who we are personifying and idealizing. She only exists in the literature. So here's the really mind-bending question. Is Dulcinea the peasant woman that Dante is in love with in the text? Or is she truly the ideal that he imagines?
Yeah, are you saying like there's no peasant woman?
Am I saying that? Am I saying that? No, not quite that. I'm asking, who is Dulcinea exactly? But that's very close to what I'm saying. Yes. Yes. All right. Good. Yeah. That's interesting. Here's a representation I think is much closer. So, I hope that the internet noted that sound. And okay, so I don't want to be rude, but we'll just give the image. It's a very different representation. This is a representation of a peasant woman. She's on a dirt floor. We've got chickens around here too. It's sort of funny. When I first went to Hawaii for the first time, I was in a place with chickens running around. It was the first time I'd ever been in a place like that. I grew up in a city, and so I hadn't seen that sort of thing. And then look, it looks like she's got some brain. And then look at those forearms. She looks strong. She looks strong. People who work outdoor all day, they're strong people. My grandfather, he's the only mountain biker ever to make it to the 98 to 100 category, and is a 3-time world champion and a 20-time national champion. He worked outside his whole life before he started athletics. So I have some tremendous respect for people who do that. But in any case, look at these very differing representations. This is something you might want to write about. Representations of ideality, of femininity in this text. And I really better hurry because these are not even the best ones from today. In any case, I wanted to problematize that for you so that when you imagine Dulcinea, who do you imagine? You're going to imagine the actual peasant woman from Toboso, or you're going to imagine what Don Quixote is. This will be problematized even further in the second part, when it is suggested that she does not even exist. Just take it one step at a time. One step at a time. On a spiral staircase, it's really hard to see what's going to come 4 steps ahead of you. And yet, you still get them. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Okay, this is a great representation of how they look. And it turns out that we find out at first how Sancho looks from his description in the Arab historian Cide Hamete Benengeli's history of Don Quixote, which in 1 second I will really get into that. But it turns out that this narrator that has been telling us about Don Quixote has himself received his information from part one of the ingenious history of Don Quixote de la Mancha. And La Mancha is within Toboso. I may be getting that. I may be mixing that up. La Mancha is either inside of Toboso or Toboso is inside La Mancha. I think it is. It's certainly one or the other. Don Quixote is tall. Don Quixote is old. Don Quixote is noble, sort of. It speaks a noble tongue, and it's also very much cerebral. He doesn't like to eat. He doesn't like to sleep. He likes to talk about chivalry. He likes to talk philosophy. He likes to talk theology. He is a sort of sophisticated mind. Sancho is often called a realist to Don Quixote's idealist. Sancho is short. Sancho rides on a donkey that will be stolen from him and then reappear out of nowhere due to perhaps an error of Cervantes or something that he includes. He's short. He's fat. He's a peasant. He loves food. He loves sleep. Panza itself means belly, by the way. So it's not a judgment that I'm putting on him. This is, in fact, something that is part of his description. He loves to, what's the other thing he loves to do? It's probably something some of us like to do, though I'm not going to hold you to this. He likes to drink. Yeah. He loves to drink with his wineskin. Yes.
So you keep saying stuff like that Cervantes is going to be making mistakes in his writing.
Yes. Yes, and I'll try and point out these instances, so write them down, will mount up. And in particular, you have observed the summaries at the beginning of chapters. Some of the summaries are off, so don't just read the summaries. They will not appropriately describe what is in the chapters. And yes, so Sancho Panza, for example, is described as being married to one Juana Gutierrez. But later, he will be described as being married to Teresa Panza. And so errors are in this text. Are they conscious? Are they not? That's something for you to really think about. Okay.
Also notice that he's not wearing his helmet.
Oh, well, and you know that helmet is a big deal given our reading. Yes, and so just a couple of funny things that you may have noticed. When Don Quixote first makes it to Juan Palomeco's inn, and he sits down to eat, did any of you notice the sort of funny thing about he has his helmet on? And his helmet has a visor. I don't know if any of you have ever had a Halloween costume where you were a knight, you got a visor. Well, what's the problem with the visor? It starts to fall when you don't hold it up. And so he has to hold up his visor while somebody feeds him. Just think it's an old man dressed as a knight. Nobody else is dressed as a knight, and he's being fed. When he fights the Basque doesn't have a shield, so he uses a pillow. It's a very funny sort of, these are things that are ridiculous, you might say. And the word ridiculous, remember it's rid, not ridiculous, as some people have started to spell it, comes from the same word as ridicule or risible. It means to, rideo in Latin means to smile down upon. I really like that. Because the ridicule means to look down upon, right? You're making fun of somebody to denigrate. If you ridicule, you're not elevating the person by any means. All right, so Don Quixote is an old, tall, minor nobleman who likes to read, lives according to a chivalric code from a time long past, if it ever existed, which it does not, and who does not like to eat. He rides on a beaten down old nag named Rocinante. That should be Rocinante with a C. Even Rocinante's name is itself a compound word from Latin that means once pack horse or once nag. Ante means before, like antebellum means before the war. And when we talk about the American Civil War in the 1860s, and then Rosius pack horse. Okay, Sancho is a short, overweight, illiterate peasant. This is something also very important. Sancho is illiterate. Don Quixote has gone insane from too much reading of chivalric romances as well as pastoral romances. This is what the Marcela and Grysostomo episode is based on, the pastoral. We will talk about that very much present. But something that Sancho brings up over and over is that how can you possibly know these chivalric codes or what exists in books or any of these characters because you can't read. And so something that I think you might really want to think about is that what is more likely to misshape your view of reality? Being illiterate or reading? Particularly in this time and age. Because, like we talked about last time, some of you said that stories, media can poison you, can make you believe delusions, can make you think that that which is false is real. And something I talked about is narrative time, right? I said, well, the problem with movies and TV is that all these dramatic moments are constantly being thrust in your face, but life is really more the boring moments where you're doing things repetitively, followed by dramatic moments. What do I mean? Well, in this text itself, when we get to the 9th chapter, and we learn that the narrator has been reading the Arabic historian's true account of Don Quixote, we hear that it takes a month and a half for the person who first translated the text for him to translate the entirety. A month and a half. There are only a few days that have passed in the actual narrative itself, and they've taken pages and pages, but how long does it take for a month and a half to pass in this narrative? A sentence, a single sentence. And that should tell you something about narrative time. If you've read Beowulf, how many of you have read Beowulf or seen Beowulf or know about Beowulf? Well, Beowulf, the entirety of the first narrative involves, or the first part of the narrative involves Beowulf fighting and defeating Grendel, and then his mother, and then in just a sentence or two, 50 years pass, and then he's old. 50 years passed. This tells you something about the meaning and the essence of narrative. It is not simply conveying to you time. It is not giving you an accurate representation of the passage of time, nor how you experience time in life. And this is something I think a lot of people never think about. And so you're kind of like, why isn't my life exciting like this show that I watch? Well, you should think about what's being represented in the show and what's not being represented. Is it perhaps entertaining to watch a movie because it takes out all the boring parts of life and only puts in the interesting parts? All right. Well, in any case, I'm going to go very quickly through chapters 4 to 8, but something I want you to observe about Don Quixote, besides the fact, so it would be very simple to say that it is difficult to say, I suppose I should say, that he's simply deluded, or that identity is something that doesn't come into conflict with reality, regardless of whether the reality is partially socially constructed or not. It is reality. So something that Don Quixote is constantly running up against is the fact that he wishes to enter into combat with individuals. And occasionally these individuals, often in fact, will defend themselves and will fight against him. And he ends up the worse for wear, over and over and over, beaten up. Either Rocinante during a charge will trip and throw Don Quixote from him, or he'll stab a windmill and get pulled up on it and fall down. And this is in full armor too, so extremely heavy hit. And then against the Basque, he has half of his ear, and your ears grow something like 0.22 centimeters a year, and he's 50, so his ears are rather big. So that's a lot of ear at that point that gets cut off of him. He's constantly paying for his view of reality. So even if we want to call him insane, even if we want to think that he is wrong-minded in how he views things, or perhaps you might see this as evidence that he is viewing things in a wrong-minded way, reality fights back against him, literally, when he wishes to fight against it. So it is not a simple thing that he is attempting to do to transform himself into a character based on fictional characters from the past. Reality fights against him. And so if he wishes to supervene his initial goal, if he wishes to bring about a new way of being based on a fictional old way of being, he's going to have to fight basically everybody that he meets. And so we see over and over again that things don't go the way that he wishes to. He sees a master beating his servant, Andreas. He says, oh, release this poor young man. It turns out that the servant was actually a thief. So Don Quixote doesn't quite get this right, though we don't know that that's actually a fact. And Don Quixote says, pay him some amount of money, this obscene amount of money, and let him go free. The master says, okay, I will do that. Just as soon as you leave, Andreas says, please not leave. He's going to whip me. He's going to whip me until I don't have any skin left. And the master does, in fact, do that, which we will find out later from Andres. So Don Quixote attempts to do good and to help somebody who is being wronged. Is the person actually being wronged? Perhaps not. He may be receiving his just punishment, brutal as it is. But does he save anybody from anything, or does he cause more pain to this individual? Does he cause more pain to himself? Does he cause more pain to Sancho? through his unwillingness to recognize the social conventions that surround. I would recommend reading these. It's too long for me to read, but they come. These. I'll read a little bit. Fly not, cowards and caitiffs, stay, for not by my fault, but my horses and my stretched shield when he falls off his horse, when he tries to charge. The muleteers. Let's see, do I want to say any of this? No. Also, we talked last time about the burning of the books, the fact that the barber and the priest are in charge of this endeavor. Remember, Amadis Segal and Oriana, beautiful Oriana, are preserved. So Cervantes is La Galatea, which we mentioned, because he is a dear friend of the author. Obviously, he is the author. And then several more destroyed because they get tired of being there. All right, the second sally involves Don Quixote going out and seeing 30 to 40 giants. These 30 to 40 giants, if you ever go up Southern California from Arizona, you'll see many of them. These are windmills, and he sees these windmills. And he decides, I really like this representation because it shows the duality between what we might perceive and he perceives. We see a windmill, but there's also a head there suggesting giants. He attacks the giants, and in his misbegotten deeds, he stabs his spear through one of the tapestry of the windmill and gets pulled up and then dropped on his behind. Another loss for them. Yeah. Okay. Things keep happening in this text. Like I said earlier, it's episodic, but the episodes aren't super connected, though you will see that Don Quixote's injuries continue to mount up. He sees a carriage with ladies in it, and outside of the carriage is a Basque who doesn't know Spanish very well, as represented through how he speaks Spanish in the original, but how it's translated into English in this its own language. And this is something we also see just a little bit later, right before talking about Marcela and Grysostomo, when again with muleteers, Don Quixote is sitting down. One of them is continuing to use expressions, but he's getting them wrong. He's like, this will last as long as my mouth sores, he says in the translation. And Don Quixote says, you mean Methuselah? There's a Christian character, and he said, well, actually my mouth sores last quite a long time. And Don Quixote says, okay, fine, because your mouth sores may last longer than Methuselah. In any case, Don Quixote then engages in combat with this Basque who refuses to back down from him, takes a pillow as a shield, and himself fights against Don Quixote, slashes him through the shoulder, through the ear, through his helmet. Had Don Quixote not had his armor on, supposedly he would have died, according to our narrator, and he loses part of his ear. Part of him losing part of his ear is why we learned that there's a potion that he will soon make called the Potion of Fieros, which supposedly could even heal him if he got cut in half, so long as he was put back together appropriately, perfectly. And so Sancho says, ooh, and Sancho is first acquired as squire to Don Quixote because Sancho has known this man his whole life. They're basically neighbors. And Don Quixote has offered Sancho an insula. That's like an island. They're landlocked, by the way. They're not anywhere close to water, but he says he will give him this outrageous thing that a middle-class individual could never, ever give to any. There'd be like one of you saying that you would give an insula to your friend if they helped you out. Perhaps someday, but at this point, it might sound a little bit ridiculous unless you're some amazing heiress, and I don't know for sure. But I would still consider that rare, and I wouldn't say that you were necessarily middle class if you were.
We also offer him to govern over any city that he conquers or whatnot.
Yes, but the big thing that Sancho is going to keep in his mind is the insula. And in fact, in part 2, for 1 week, Sancho will be given, and make sure you see this, an insula by a duke who will be making fun of Don Quixote. We'll find more and more characters that really get a kick out of Don Quixote. Inés de Pasamonte, the Duke, and a couple others as well. All right, so Don Quixote gives as well as he gets. He loses a bit of his ear, so now it's a little bit deformed. He mentions the famous potion, the balm of Fieros, and one of the muleteers gives a very practical, real solution. He chews up some rosemary, puts some salt on it. I've never done this, and puts it on the ear of Don Quixote while bandaging it very well. Don Quixote's ear stops hurting. And how you know that Don Quixote is not so crazy that he can supervene pain is that he continues to mention how much his ear hurts. And I mean, I can only imagine. Any of you ever had an ear infection? Or I don't know, any of you ever done jujitsu and had your ears, kind of messed up by a bee? Have you seen people do jujitsu and what happens to their ears? Cauliflower ears? Yeah, no, we were all really scared of that. Most of my friends had them, and they were proud of them, but you have to drain them basically immediately, or they stay there. Yeah, we'll see, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's a mark of pride. All right. This here describes what we get in chapter 9, which is very bizarre. The narrative ends after chapter 8 and part 1 ends. We're told by the narrator that he doesn't have any more of the true history of Don Quixote to tell us. So now we follow him around when he is walking through the city, and apparently he's a big reader too, so this might make us question, is he in fact sane? And he even likes reading scraps of paper from the ground. So I like to read a lot too, but I don't necessarily do that. And he finds some Arabic works, and he doesn't read Arabic. And so he asks a local Morisco to translate for him. And the Morisco opens the book to the middle. And what happens?
He sees God.
But there's something even before that. He laughs. He starts to laugh. And this is what hips the narrator to. He hears the names in their Dulcinea, but the laughter is what indicates this must be Don Quixote. A couple things that are said here. Maybe I have them written. The role of Cide Hamete Benengeli. You see here a little bit of the parochialism of Spain. We have some claims made about Arabic historians who would be Muslim, clearly at this juncture, written about by a Christian. He says that these Arabic speakers are known liars. This is strange because what do we know about the history of Don Quixote? What is it called? It is called the what history of Don Quixote? The true history. And so there's another major contradiction. These lying people, but this true history. And then he even makes the additional claim that any history which is true is good. And so what must make Don Quixote good is that it is true. But it is written by a person who, by the prejudice of the narrator, is most likely telling falsehoods within the context of this being a fictional narrative itself. So what is it that you're even reading? Can fiction even be good? The author himself says that history is good when it's true. This is a history, and insofar as it's true, it must be good. This claim must be false. This is a work of fiction. It must not be judged as history. But these, again, are the cul-de-sacs and the ways that Cervantes will move to confuse the issues in front of us. In any case, Cervantes finds, or rather the narrator, I should say, finds the second part of the story while listening to an Arabic speaker laugh about the characters he knows to be from the story of Don Quixote. And then hires this person on for a month and a half to further translate the rest of Don Quixote so that ostensibly we can actually read it. Why does the author do this? Why does the author do this? Why does the author stop the narrative just to say that he can't find the rest of it, just to say that by accident he found it? And then these series of events happen so that now, in the middle of this fight with the bats, we can finally get back to it. Why does he do that? What does that create in you?
I was just gonna say, it's like with battles in history, like they're written, they're like a lot of recounting of them. So like when you talk about like the true history, it's like another person also wrote about this particular man at this time. So he's reinforcing that it's a true history by having another account of it.
Does it create a sense of desire in you to hear the rest of the history, sensing that it might be denied to you? The moment, even you've taken it for granted. There's this long book. It's just going to keep going. And then he says, actually, I don't have the rest. And this creates a sense of, not panic in you because it's just a book, but a sense of slight longing, right? The second something is denied to you, You don't need to admit this. Don't you want it a little bit more? In fact, economists call this the marginal theory of value. You pay what you're willing to pay for something, not how much it's worth. Not all economists. There are labor theorists of value, Marxists, for example, but they're marginal theory of value people. And I can say things like a gallon of oil, you'll pay as much for that as a gallon of water. They're similarly priced, for example, around $3 or $4. And yet, are the value of these things equivalent at all? One is the most abundant resource on Earth. One is one that takes millions and millions of years to distill. And so maybe, maybe not. I'm not an economist, but I just wanted to point that out. Was it? Yes. You sure? Okay. Well, it looks like I'm not going to get to Grysostomo and Marcela today. But one thing I'm going to put as a preview for you is Marcela is herself a character who is a rich young lady who is expected to wed. In fact, this Grysostomo character falls in love with her. He's also wealthy. And then he takes on the garb of a shepherd, goes out in the woods and follows her and pines for her, and eventually he kills himself. And because he kills himself, he cannot be interred in Catholic land. This is why he asks to be put where he first saw Marcela. So this is a bit of religion getting in here. Suicide makes it so that if one is Catholic, one may not be buried in hallowed ground. This is still something that certain Catholics take very seriously. If you're Catholic yourself, you probably know this. And so he wishes to marry this woman or be with this woman, Marcela, who has herself eschewed her social role as heiress and has gone out to the woods as a shepherdess. She has taken on a new identity. She has taken on new clothes. She has taken on new values. And yet the men in her life, and there are more than Grysostomo, because she's apparently quite lovely, like a Helen of Troy, are pursuing her and trying to force her back into this role. My question to you, is she herself a figure of Don Quixote? Is she herself an individual attempting to redefine herself in a society that pushes back against it? And I really want to, we'll touch on this much more on Friday because we really have to, because this is one of the first great moments in this text where I think we really think. But that's all that we have time for today. Okay, in the last 3 minutes of class, I'm going to see what I can say about what I need to say. And again, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. One thing I recommend to you, and in fact, I insist, do not use quotes from my slides. Go to the actual articles. The slides might have errors. And also with David Damrosch's work, he has a book that has the same name as one of his articles. Very confusing, but it is a plagiaristic mistake to miscite. So go to the actual citation. Do not trust me. Trust the citation. Never just take me at my word. The whole point of being a professor is that I have a reason behind everything that I say. It is not permissible for me to just say things. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a pastor. I'm a professor. And I can be wrong, but that's part of the game. That's part of the whole experience. You can prove me wrong that you have done something, except, you've done something that you're supposed to have learned how to do in this class. We're not supposed to think anybody is perfect, except in certain literary traditions. All right, so number one, using David Damrosch's article from the first lecture or presentation, what is world literature? Make sure to cite this from the article itself, not from the presentation slides I say, and then I give you the citation. This is JSTOR. You can access this just by going to the link. You may have to sign in with your LSU credentials. Make an argument for why Don Quixote, 1, is or is not a masterpiece, and 2, is or is not a work of modernism. There's at least one scholarly secondary source, not a dictionary. It can be the one that's above. Find a scholarly source on JSTOR if you want to find another one, like Tanner did earlier. Very well done. To define masterpiece, and one to define modernism. You are welcome to use sources different from Damrosch and Levin. Levin wrote what was modernism, but they must be scholarly sources. JSTOR is an excellent resource. I'd say the best resource for you at this time. You have to access and find scholarship. JSTOR is itself a meta collection of journals that has many journals with many, many articles that you can access for free through your LSU account. I know that I wanted to tell you a little bit more about modernism, and I even downloaded it, but I'm gonna have to tell you a little bit about this on Friday. But I will say, if you have started your writing and you're really interested in pinning down the definition of modernism, I've got a 4-point attempt at that from this new author that I've now read. Not that new, it's this article is 50 years old, named either Beebe or Beebe. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. I've never met him. All right, that's all I've got time to say. Class dismissed. Wonderful seeing you all today.